Yeah, thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Michael, for the introduction. Let's see. Now I'm super happy to talk to you about what we call next-gen MROI. It's a little bit of the answer that we give clients, CMOs, when they ask us, okay, what's next in MROI? And why do they ask this question? Is because they are a bit frustrated, even though we have all these wonderful tools, and I mean, some of them Patricia just mentioned, they still have a lot of limitations, a lot of structural limitations that cause frustrations. And here's like our top 5 list in this case that you're faced with, especially if you a bit step out of your digital silo, where some of that, of course, do not apply. But generally, if you want to do cross-channel, you hit those 5. It's backward-looking data. So still, we talk about 2-3 years of weekly data that we analyze and try to make decisions for the future. Mostly, we're obsessed with putting marketing spend and optimizing marketing spend, and creatives and messages are dealt with elsewhere, pre-market tests or not at all, especially not part of the measurement model. A general lack of granularity. It's great for take CPGs, the big brands, the big campaigns, the average customer. I think we've seen this lovely picture of the average American. We can do all of this. But if we talk about niche brands, niche campaigns, we basically just get noise. Short-termism, meaning that we're all, rightfully so, very much concerned about sales. But we also had this discussion, I think, 2 sessions ago about brand. How does marketing drive brand, and how the indirect effect looks from brand awareness and brand building to sales conversion. Again, dealt with, but in a separate silo. And then lastly, this is probably true for a lot of MROI topics. You know a lot, but there's a little bit of a gap to the campaign teams, the media teams to actually execute on this. Maybe to position next-gen MROI, and you could also call it, I think other people call it unified measurement or total marketing measurement. I kind of like this slide. It shows kind of how this evolves. It's basically comparing that to existing models like MTA, MMM, which, MTA starting very granular, but only in the digital silo. MMM, of course, is touching everything, basically, but on aggregate data sets. I think up until a year ago, we also, as McKinsey would say, okay, the aligned MMM, MTA is kind of the way to go. But you still talk about 2 different models. You can make them talk to each other, but you still have 2 models, which is not ideal. So pushing the boundaries a little bit is basically saying we love the granularity of MTA, but actually want to have this all across the board, which actually requires us to change our underlying data model and basically go to person-level data sets. And that's also sort of one of the 4 key elements of what we believe should be the gold standard for MRI that we should aim for. It's really going from aggregate data sets to person-level data, so really understanding on the person level. I'm not talking cookie, I'm talking like a real customer or prospect, understanding exposures, understanding their upper funnel brand metrics, and also understanding their actions. That's the first part. The second one is that we should always look at media and creative, and basically look at the other 50% of marketing effectiveness, which we tend to not look at currently. Then the third one is not only look at sales impact, but really have a measurement system which really has all types of KPIs, upper, mid, and lower funnel in one system. And then lastly, we should be in a position where we have enough granular data short-term, say a month, to really run our analytics on and have kind of basically in-campaign, I mean, real-time is always a big word, but say near real-time feedback that allows us to really go for in-campaign optimization. Now, especially if I have these kind of talks, I think in the US this kind of resonates. If I have these talks in Germany, then the reaction is a mix of, okay, it's a nice consultant framework, and it sounds a bit like science fiction. but I think it's not, and it's also not the case outside the US. In order to get there, it's two crucial steps. You have to do a lot of data stitching to get to that granular data set, and then you have to do the analytics. And like Michael said, we had a discussion yesterday, this challenge is typically not the analytics. And I would also say, I mean, the kind of modeling we run on the data set is very similar to what we used to do for MMM for a long, long time. The challenge is indeed on the left side to really bring together all these data points. The exposure data points, the upper funnel stuff, transactions, CRM data, and there you basically hit a lot of things that I've seen also in the morning when you have things like panel data being super important. And we had this lovely out-of-home panel example, which will be one data point here. You also have the relevance of a safe harbor. I mean, GDPR is a big issue, but this can also be done in a GDPR-compliant way. It's also one of my messages here, and we've done that with partners, say, in Australia. And then you need also an identity graph, because you really want to bring this down to a real person and not just a cookie. And yeah, once you have that, I think basically this concept of granularity of growth, of course, applies. You have much more granular data, which, of course, enables you to have much richer optimizations than on the aggregate data sets. And that's where we believe this is kind of why this approach is fundamentally better than everything we have right now. Important last touch on this. It's not just a tool and measurement question here. And what we also love to take these discussions to the CMO level is because if we switch to such a model, your whole operating model also needs to follow along. Like your campaign teams need to work differently. Your decisioning processes need to work differently. People really need to adapt kind of a more agile campaigning approach because they have all of this data. They need to be more granular in the campaigning, and also you need to work differently with your partners, especially the agencies. I mean, you will squeeze them for more frequent data sets, but you also want them to execute much more frequent changes. And that, I think, was also mentioned in a previous session. It's more of a partnership than a traditional, you know, I have a supplier, I have an agency, and I brief them, and then they do stuff for me. That's basically those the key messages. So from our side, it's really the analytics, it's person-level data set, and lastly, that even though the data landscape is not perfect, you should start today. Thank you.